Hi, my name is Rehema Kasule. I'm the president of SIDA International in Uganda and in the US. I'm also a senior fellow with the Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative. And today I'm going to take you through really how to write a compelling proposal so that you get your grant. Grant writing is one of the hardest things that everyone is talking about. But more than ever, we need to invest in social entrepreneurs and nonprofit organizations to unlock my screen to take you through some of the tips and tools I've used over the last 15 years to raise capital for my organization, SIDA International, but to also support other nonprofit organizations around the world to unlock more capital. And it's going to be easy. Let's make it fun. One thing I tell people, grants writing is really, it's an art. You need to see it as an art of telling stories. And when you tell the story, that's the only way you can write a grant proposal that is going to be compelling enough. So it's about communication, it's about telling the story, it's about precision, and it's about building evidence. And so today I'm going to briefly take you through that 10 piece framework. I'm going to take you through forms of grants proposals and sources of funding, templates on how to write the grant, and also go deeply into defining the problem and solution, a few best practices and key learnings from around the world globally, and really finally, what do funders look for in our grants proposal? One of the fear facts, which is interesting, is the number one fear in the world is death. And COVID-19 has shown us that. The number two fear is public speaking. And the number three fear is asking for money. Asking for money is so difficult because people think they will judge me. They don't know how to ask for money. They don't know where to ask for money. And they don't know what purpose is the money used for. What is the money that you're asking? What are you going to use it for? But this is also a fact and a concern for me as a nonprofit leader and a consultant. 60% of the nonprofits are always in startup mode. That's a point to note. Secondly, founders and executive directors spend more than 60% of their time fundraising and only 35% on programming and probably only 5% on strategy. But guess what? We need to spend more time on strategy than running around fundraising. And so today, the tools and tips I'm going to take you through will enable you really focus on your fundraising with clear strategies. So I want us to think through. And I always say, dream big, start small, and scale up. So today I'm going to talk about the vision and strategy. And let's imagine a blue sky, very bright blue sky. If you are given $1 million today, what is the audacious goal where you're going to deploy that capital? Take a minute and think about it. How are you going to deploy that capital? And this, I've framed it in 3 questions. One is the vision. Do you have a vision? What is your vision for your fundraising vision for the next 2 to 3 years? And it needs to be very specific and exciting for you to say, I'm going to wake up every day to fundraise. Number 2, I've also asked you to think about your purpose. Why do you need that funding? And lastly, strategy. What are you going to do to make sure you diverse your revenue streams? Do you have a strategy, or are you going on with everything in life without knowing whether you're going east or west? So I'll briefly take you through the types of grant proposals. These come in all kinds of forms, but number 1 are letters of interest. Some funders ask for expression of interest. Some funders ask for concept note, executive summary, pitch decks, case for support, strategic plans, especially for social impact work. And then when it comes to like the UN, USID, they send a request for proposals. And really, this is a full proposal where you need to outline your goals, outcomes, outputs, activities, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, the logo framework, the KPIs, how you're going to implement. It's a full proposal. The other parts, the first 4 parts, mainly they are either between 1 to 2 pages or even 3 pages. And I've also written one, which was only to 1 page, and I got a grant of 100,000. So really, it depends on the donor and what they are looking for. Then I'm going to take you through some funding trends I've seen over the last 15 years. Currently, 80% for all calls for proposals are by invites only. Think about it. If you don't have the right networks, if you're not visible enough, donations and grants are by invites only, 80%. And interestingly, more and more donors are investing in the individuals before they invest in the idea. And there's more funding for women-founded organizations, which is really a plus for us as women founders. And of course, donors are doing more due diligence to make sure that what you put on paper is on the ground. But another interesting trend is the interest in social entrepreneurship. So for whatever venture you have, think about the social cause, but also think about the impact and the scale. More interestingly, 90% of all US foundations don't have websites. So still emphasizing the fact that you have to think through your networks. I always tell people that your networks create your net worth. So think about the networks. Lastly, and also most importantly, and very interesting, is the shift from international organizations to investing in local ideas and proximate leaders. This outside, for example, MasterCard Foundation, they call it decolonizing funding. It's a beautiful concept where they are looking at investing in local ideas, local solutions by the local people, not people jetting in with ideas to think they are going to solve problems in communities that they don't know. But guess what? We have a lot of untapped funding within our countries, but we are always looking outside. So think about your country and think about the funding within the community. Then when it comes to grants writing, like I said, this is a story. You need to tell a story. But in order to tell that story, you need to begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind before you tell the story. So one of the things you need to do, first of all, you need to brainstorm with your team before you build the proposal. But before you even do that, you have to make sure you write everything down. I always say that the weakest pen is stronger than the strongest mind. So don't say, I have it all. Put it down. Practice it internally with your people, with your team. If it feels good, definitely put it down. If it's not, then ideate it till you say, this is the proposal, this is the grant I want other people to look at. Of course, evaluators, and I'm speaking now as an evaluator. I've done evaluations for the last 5 years, high impact evaluations with MacArthur Foundation. For example, the 100 and change competition. As an evaluator, probably I'm given to 20 proposals, and I only take between 20 to 30 minutes to evaluate a proposal. So in the first 3 to 5 minutes, I know whether I'm going to continue with the proposal, or you know what, I'll look at it another day, or it's not worth my time. But just to emphasize, 60% of the proposals are rejected because of the budget. The budget doesn't align with your vision, with your goal, with your outputs, or even still, the budget doesn't align with what the funder is looking for. And later on, I'll share with you and share how the budget should be written. So that is not only compelling, but it's also feasible and aligns with your whole proposal. Along the years, I've designed, because this has been a journey where you don't know what to do and how to do it. So with my key learnings, I've designed what I call the 10 Ps. What I did is combine design thinking and grants writing, and I came up with the 10 Ps, really to make my life easy, but also to support and help other organizations to write their proposals better. And so the 10 Ps looks at three really levels. The first level is the problem landscape. The second level is the solutions landscape. The third level is the implementation landscape. So I call it the 10 Ps to be remembered, but also emphasize the key aspects of your proposal. So first, you need to define what is the problem. Then you need to set the purpose. You need to identify the people. You need to identify the place. Where are you going to do your project? Is it in Uganda? Is it global? Is it national? Is it within a specific community? Then you need to design the project. You need to design the pathways. Those are the strategies. How are you going to do it? You need to define the process. What is specifically are you going to do in terms of activities, in terms of outputs? How are you going to measure? And then when it comes to the implementation landscape, you need to engage partnerships. I'm going to say this once again: partnerships, partnerships, partnerships. For example, if you're talking about education, you can't talk about systemic transformations within the education system as a nonprofit organization without engaging the government, for example, without engaging the community, without engaging the parents. So you need to think about this as an ecosystem. So you need to identify the right partnerships. You need to identify the policies which are directly in connection with your project, and you need to anchor your project into existing practice. And moving on to telling the story, this I love because many times when we are thinking about grants writing, we don't realize that you're telling a story. I've used Aristotle's effective tools of communication, the pathos, ethos, legos, and kairos. And really what you need to do as you're telling your story, you need to really show the logic appeal. The emotional and ethical examples, give those, make it personal. Use your past experience, the lived experiences. But of course, they have to be guided by credibility and trustworthy. And also, you need to clarify your message. It needs to be so clear that whoever is reading your proposal understands what you're talking about. But then, importantly, you have to show that whatever you're writing, the proposal you're proposing to this funder is urgent, is timely, and it needs attention. And once you do that, then you have to go to the grants writing proposal and think about that template they gave you. I'm going to share with you that template that most organizations and donors use. This is sort of universal, but it changes from time to time, and different donors use different wordings and different phrases. But most of the time, it's the same template you're going to find. And Stanford Social Innovation Review has a very good template, which I'll share with you later on. So one of the key aspects of effective communication and storytelling, it starts with a project title. They'll ask you for a project title. It has to be very simple and catchy, where someone will remember what kind of proposal this is, what kind of project it is. I'll give you an example. One of my projects is called Plus Africa Incubator. It's easy. When someone looks at it, they know I'm going to work in Africa. Plus is bringing people together. Incubator, I'm going to link ideas. I'm going to incubate ideas. I'm going to link ideas to incubation programs, to funding, to mentorship. So already the title of the project is exciting enough. And another key aspect I've learned along the way, which is interesting as I go through the template, the grants writing template, is this whole concept of one sentence challenge. I know many times we talk about the elevator pitch, which is 30 seconds or less, but I also love what Candid does and the way they call it a one sentence challenge. Still, to make it easy for you, I made it my own to say 10 cues of writing a grants proposal. And the 10 questions that are asked in most of the projects, they will ask you to define your problem, the solution, how you're going to implement it, why is it important, and why is it urgent? What impact is your project going to do? How are you going to measure it? How are you going to sustain the project beyond their funding, the donors' funding? What is your mission, the mission of your organization? And how does it align to your experience and the funding that you're asking for? Who are your collaborators, the coalition, the people, the partners, the organizations you are going to work with? And lastly, you must talk about the cost. What is it going to cost to implement this project? And later on, I'll show you how you're going to really work out the cost and the budget so that funders and grant-making organizations look at your proposal and say, definitely they've done enough research. Before we go further, one of the key aspects I'm going to go deeper is understanding the problem. I'm going to use the human-centered design. And Harvard Innovation Lab has a very good tool that we use to really emphasize how to understand the problem. In understanding the problem, a problem is not a problem in itself. So you need to think about the problem as a landscape, diverse, huge. So in defining your problem, you need to look at the micro challenge. What is the big issue? For example, in this case, I'll give an example of gender inequality. That's the macro. It's big, it's huge. Gender inequality globally is a big challenge, which we really need to solve. Then you need to look at the sub-problem. And in the sub-problem, for example, you may say, in gender inequality, I'm going to look at economic development. And in economic development, I'm going to look at financial inclusion or business development. But then specifically, you need to think about you as an organization, as CEDA International. What are you going to do in this huge landscape? So I've broken it to the specific problem, for example, to be youth unemployment. That's what I'm going to work on. And then below that, you still need to go through a sub-problem. So youth unemployment is a global challenge. It's big, even in Uganda, where I am, it's a huge challenge. However, my organization is going to focus on young women's lack of access to safe, dignified, and gainful employment. So in order for me to think through this, I'm not going to solve every challenge to do with gender inequality. I'm going to focus on young women's access to safe, dignified, and gainful employment. So I'm going deeper into my problem now. Into looking at this, you also need to do a quick root cause analysis. You need to peel away the layers. Don't work at the symptom level. And I've seen, as an evaluator, I've seen this many times where people have great proposals, but they are talking about the symptoms. So you really need to think about the root cause. What causes this? And so I'll show you, looking at youth unemployment, looking at young women's lack of access to safe, dignified employment. In terms of root cause analysis, I looked at the labor and market skills. I looked at basic business skills, finances to start businesses, communication and confidence is a critical issue. But then I also looked at social capital and the networks. And going down, I also look at policies, practices, and the laws within the country. But within your proposal, you can't address all these issues because the interventions, for example, for policy and practice and laws are not the same interventions if you're talking about financing small businesses. It's not the same intervention if you're talking about labor and market skills. So be very precise about what you're going to solve. Then here, I've given you an example of a problem statement I developed for one of my projects. I said in Uganda, 80% of the recent young graduates can't find employment paying more than $1.25 a day due to lack of labor skills, inadequate career planning, and social capital. So look at the main items I'm emphasizing. 80%. Wow, that's alarming. 80% of the young women don't have jobs. And then I'm going specific, young women graduates. So I'm not going to deal, for example, with women in the rural areas. I'm not going to look at women who are not educated. I'm specifically focusing on young women graduates. And then I bring in another alarming statistics. They can't earn more than $1.25 a day. That's alarming. And then I bring in why. Lack of labor skills, lack of career planning, and limited social capital. So below that, I've given you an example of really what I call now the problem landscape, going from just the statement to the landscape. Still, the keywords I've highlighted are youth unemployment globally. I started with the word globally to show you that this is a global issue. And then I spoke about Uganda, now going to the specifics. I bring in a statistics about 40% of the country's youth unemployment. And then citing examples to say these statistics come from International Labour Organization and Uganda Bureau of Statistics. Already you're showing the evaluator that you did research to know what is going on in the country. Then to make it more emotional, I bring in a story of Sarah Namkasa. Sarah Namkasa got a degree, but she couldn't find a job. And her friends told her to go to Dubai, where she was trafficked for labor exploitation. So already I'm making the evaluator think through to say, definitely there's an issue. And I go further and bring in a current issue, which is COVID-19 pandemic. And I say that because of that, young women can't even afford 2 meals a day. That's alarming. And gender-based violence is also on the rise. Already, the evaluator thinks about this and says, definitely this project needs to be funded. So going from the problem, I'm going to now take you through the solution. This is still a very easy solution. I said that Plus Africa Linkubator is a leadership, employment, and entrepreneurship project. I'm already defining the solution. And what is it going to do? It's going to skill, connect, and engage young women. To do what? For holistic learning and workforce development and entrepreneurship development in order to create youth employment pathways. Already, I've defined everything I'm going to do. But below that, I've given you a brief concept note to see the solution in detail. The first aspect is looking at the concept. What is the concept? It's a leadership, employment, and entrepreneurship project. What is it going to do? Create youth employment. Then strategies, we are going to skill, connect, and provide career planning for young women. And in terms of goal, We want young women to succeed in a global economy for productive employment or business. And what results do we want to show? We want to create economic independence, build resilience, and create safe, dignified, and stable employment and income for young women so that we break the intergenerational cycles of poverty. By illustrating this to the evaluator of your project, the donor already sees that you understand what you're talking about holistically. You know the concept, you know the pathways, you have the strategies, you know the goal, and you know your anticipated results. In just one paragraph, it doesn't have to be 10 pages for you to communicate to the donor. And this, I'm going to take you through how do you weave this story together? Because, like I said, grants writing is about weaving the story together. So how do you weave that story together? Remember, we talked about the problem landscape, the solutions landscape, and the implementation landscape. So these slides and this specific slide, I'm taking you through what is the problem. The problem is high youth unemployment. What is the solution? I'm going to do a leadership, employment, and entrepreneurship education to create employment pathways. How am I going to implement it? Career planning, entrepreneurship, business incubation, financial literacy. And then you go back to your problem. What causes this problem? Labor skills mismatch, limited social capital, inadequate career planning. So how do you plan to solve that? You're going to skill young women, you're going to connect them to mentors, you're going to engage them. Who are you going to at the implementation level? How are you going to do all that? I'm going to partner with vocational and business training institutes, universities, and the private sector. At the problem level, who are you speaking about? Who are the people? Those are young women graduates. How does youth unemployment affect them? They can't earn $1.25 a day. They are vulnerable to labor exploitation and gender-based violence. So how are you planning to solve that? In terms of results, I'm going to create economic independence, social stability, and resilient and stable work for the young people. So already I'm weaving the story from the problem to the solution to the implementation. But one thing I want to emphasize as you are weaving the story, what is your ask? I've seen very many great proposals, but when it comes to the ask, you're not sure, what are they saying? So what? I've understood everything they've said, but so what? So you have to underpin this by talking about the investment. To say, I need 100,000 to create employment for 50 young women. Already the funder would do a bit of mathematics and say, oh, interesting. For only $200, they're going to impact 500 women. Then that sort of brings in your feasibility. Is your project feasible? Is it cost effective? So are you with me up to this point? Next, I'm going to take you through the best practices. Harvard Business School, especially the Social Enterprise Center, has a very interesting tool that I'll share with you as a link about best practices. And it gives best practices from the concept level, the writing level, and the journal level. These are the best practices of writing an effective grants proposal. So at concept level, one of the best practices is the idea. You really need to define your idea very well and very clearly. And also think through, is your idea meeting a need that exists within your community? Because once you think about the idea, that's where you get the solution to say, yes, there's a need, which is youth unemployment, for example, in my community. And so what solution do I come up with? And the second best practice I've seen over the years is the concept note. For everything before you write a full grants proposal, write a one-pager overview. Go through the details and think through and say, does this align with what the community wants? Not what you want as an individual. And don't write a prescriptive solution before you know the problem. Of course, you have to tell a compelling story. And it needs to be very, very specific to that project. Not broad, it has to be broad enough, but very specific to your project. And then you need to know that a grants proposal is never about your needs of your organization. It's about the community that you want to serve and what the funder wants to invest in. I'll say that again. It's not the needs of your organization. It's what the community needs and what the funder is looking to invest in. Of course, that has to be with a specific value proposition. I've seen many proposals. I can evaluate 10 proposals, and I'm thinking, what is unique about your proposal? So you really need to bring out the value proposition. What is the value add? Something that someone hasn't done before, or something you're going to do better. That's where you need to build an authentic and innovative idea. And of course, that has to be in reliable data and statistics, because that's the only way you're going to build your evidence, but also demonstrate that you understand what you're speaking about. At writing level, and now we are going to the actual writing. The first part was about the concept. At the writing level is another interesting thing and tips to take as best practices. Number one, please avoid using abbreviations. I know for sure in the development world, we love abbreviations, but just think about it and say, probably someone doesn't understand the words I'm talking about. For example, you say NGO. In Africa, for example, we say NGO. In the US, they say nonprofit organizations. Some people say civil society organizations. So don't assume that the language you use SMEs to mean small and medium enterprises. Probably the evaluator doesn't understand what SMEs is. And also don't assume that they're going to go on the website to look for what you mean by SME. Also, you need to avoid big words. I know still we use words like gender mainstreaming, intersectionality, mutually exclusive, capacity building. Capacity building is a huge concept. It may mean from infrastructure to building systems, to investing, to building teams. So be specific about the words you use. Of course, don't over-impress or over-promise. Here, what do I mean? For example, you say for 100,000, you're going to impact 100,000 young women. $100,000 to impact 100,000 women. Already the evaluator will know, no, they are over-impressing. This is not feasible enough. It's also interesting that you need to think about the formats. Many templates and proposals, they ask for specific word count or character count, or they request for specific number of pages. Don't go beyond what the donor wants. Of course, you have to present it in a very professional manner. If English is not your first language, like me, use Grammarly so that you don't have punctuation and grammar mistakes. And make your proposal very comprehensive. Have a checklist and look at it and say, have I covered what the donor wants, what they asked for? Is everything accounted for? Then continuing with the best practices. One of the other key aspects I've learned along the way is to align your project closely with what the goal of your organization, so that you don't drift away from your mission. And I've seen this very many times where you get a donor who says, I'm doing something in climate change, and you run after that money. But guess what? The donor will look at your track record and realize that you have no experience in climate change, for example. So don't drift away from your mission because you're focusing on getting the grant. Another best practice is to diversify your sources of funding. This I have to emphasize and say it many times. Look at local donors. Look at the national and international donors. Look at corporate funding. There's so much money within our communities, but we are not diversifying our sources of funding enough. Then you need to think about timing, because grants are very timely. They will put it for 2 weeks and bring it down. So think about it. And also know that the timing has to be urgent. For example, everyone is now talking about COVID-19. Do you have a project that is addressing COVID-19 in your community? It's timely, so most likely you'll get the funding. Lastly, and also most importantly, make sure that you don't assume that the evaluator has knowledge of your project or your subject matter. And I'll give a clear example. For example, with the MacArthur Foundation, I've evaluated 100 and change competitions. Those are projects which are more than 100 million. I'm given diverse, large-scale projects from climate change, gun control, democracy, maternal health, racial justice. But guess what? I'm not a subject matter in all those projects and fields. But as an evaluator, I look at what you've submitted. I look at the format that I was given to you. I don't, and this is something you need to understand. Please don't send links for your website unless it's asked for. Because as an evaluator, I have so limited time. I won't go to your website to read more about what you mean. So communicate it very well, tell the story, have precision, and build evidence. And that brings me to one of the best practices I want to speak about, which is the budget. Like I said in the beginning, 60% of the projects are they're declined because of the budgets. So in the budget, you need to think about preparing a detailed budget, but outline how each of the line items is going to be allocated with the grants money. You need to have individual budget notes. What do I mean? For each line item, for example, if you're saying you're going to conduct a training or a mentoring or coaching session, how many days in a week, for how long, how many hours, how many people, how much will it take? All that is part of the budget notes. You also need to directly align the budget with the activities, the outputs, and the outcomes. This is a whole nother aspect and gap I've seen in many proposals I've evaluated, where they have a very beautiful proposal, but when it comes to their budget, it doesn't align. Yeah, second guessing, did they mean this or the other? It's also important, and I'll emphasize this, to ask for the right amount of money. What does this mean? A funder, for example, may say that the project is $100,000 US. So in your proposal, don't ask for 250,000 because it was specific 100,000. That's number one. Secondly, I've also seen organizations, for example, they've never managed more than 100,000, but they're asking for $1 million. No funder is going to give you $1 million. And actually, as a matter of fact, some funders say they can't fund more than 30% of your annual budget. So asking for the right amount of money is so critical in your budget so that you don't look as if you're just putting figures together. Also, you need to avoid putting a lot of administrative and salaries to take up most of your budget, unless it's unrestricted funding. But for organizations like United Nations, USAID, they really want you to spend not more than 15 to 20% of the money in terms of administration. And I know what they mean, because at the end of the day, You don't want to spend 60% on buying vehicles and paying staff members and taking trips abroad, and only 40% goes to the actual beneficiaries in the communities that you're working in. So you really need to think about how are you structuring your budget. Of course, you must show the bigger picture to say, for example, the project is 300,000 US dollars. However, for this particular activity, the grant is going, for example, to buy 10 computers, organize 10 workshops, and do a mentorship program. So you really need to be specific about what activities or outputs the grant is going to work on. Lastly, and also most importantly, and many organizations don't know this, you have to show that the organization is going to contribute to the project, whether in cash or kind. I'll give you an example. When I'm writing a proposal, as a lead on the proposal, for example, I can say I'm going to work on the project for 40% of my time on the project. However, I won't put a salary for myself in the budget and show that I'm going to donate, for example, 50,000 of my time, 50,000 US dollars of my time on the project. That demonstrates that the organization is contributing to the project. Also, you can get in volunteers. You can get the organization to donate the internet instead of the organization billing that on the project, because the project, if it doesn't have a lot of money, you are going to use that. Going on to, this is a very interesting aspect as an evaluator of projects. I love speaking about scoring the project. And in scoring the project, we look at still two levels. We look at the concept level and then the implementation level. Why? Because in order for you to write an effective grants proposal, you need to look at the concept, and also you need to think about how you're going to implement the project. So at concept level, we look at a basic, like 5 areas. Is the project significant? Is it important? Is it a critical barrier, for example, in the field or in the community? Is it innovative enough? Does it challenge or seek to shift current research or programs or paradigm shifts? Is it a new idea? Is it a new intervention? So you really need to think about innovation. I know many people, when you talk about innovation, they think you are speaking about technology. No, it may be the approach, it may be the methodology, it may be the strategy that is innovative, or it may be even the target audience. I've seen, for example, many of the organizations now, if they are talking about gender empowerment, they bring in allyship, where they bring in men. Already, that's innovation. So also you need to think about the approach. You need to align, number 4, you need to align the project to the funder, to your goals of your organization, to the funder and donors' mission and needs. And lastly, at concept level, number 5, you need to think about relevance. Is your project relevant? Is it urgent? Is it relevant in your community? Is it relevant in your country? Is it relevant today? And then speaking about implementation level. At implementation level, there are different aspects. Still, I put 5 top aspects. Number 1 is feasibility and cost effectiveness of the project. Do a quick cost benefit analysis. Like I said, you can say $100,000. If it can create 500 jobs for young people, that's $200 per beneficiary. Think about it. Is it cost effective? Think about sustainability. I'm going to emphasize this one more time. Sustainability and durability of the project. The evaluator or the donor is going to see that your project won't survive beyond their funding. So in your grants writing, you have to emphasize and demonstrate that you have plans for the project to survive beyond the grant funding period. You also have to think about scalability and adaptability. Is this a proven model? Can it be scaled in other communities or other demographics? Proximity and leadership. Is the leader proximate enough? Do they understand and experience the problem firsthand? Do they have connections on the community to make sure that it's going to be sustainable? The implementation is going to go in the right direction. Does the institution have the right experience? Do they have the capacity, systems, and track record to really implement this project? I know as a grant writer, this is where you give up to say, this is too much. But guess what? All those aspects must be communicated in your proposal. Whether you're writing a 1-pager, a 3-pager, or 20 pages, you must make sure that you really talk about the concept level. What are those things we are going to look at when we are scoring? At implementation level, have you demonstrated feasibility, scalability, proximity, institutional experience? All that has to be in your proposal. I'm going to briefly talk about donors and sources of funding. I can't overemphasize that your networks will build your net worth. So if it's donor lists or networks, you have to be within those networks. You have to be on the mailing list. Remember what I said in the beginning, 80% of the donors now work within their community. They work with people they trust. So you are only asked to send a proposal. It's by invite only. So be part of those networks and those donor lists. But interestingly, there are also so many incubators and accelerator programs, GRK, Africa Venture Philanthropist Fund. There are also very many online fundraising platforms. There are those which are free, like funds for NGOs. And there are those for subscription. For example, Foundation Directly Online. You have to subscribe in order to access the donor database. There are also very many competitions whether they are thematic or geographical. I already spoke about 100 and change. There are those which are racial. For example, racial inequality is another thematic area which is interesting now. There are so many fellowships, Mlago Foundation, Echoing Green, Acumen Fund. And I want to emphasize this. Listen very carefully. As one of the best sources of funding, which I've used in my organization, is consultancy. As a nonprofit organization with a background in business and marketing, I decided that I can't just depend on the donor. I knew I had to diverse my funding opportunities. So I looked at my organization and developed key competencies and a talent of people who can offer consultancy services to other organizations. And we called it fee for hire, where you can develop mentorship programs, for example, for other organizations. Or if your competence is sexual and reproductive health, look for other people you can collaborate with and be their sub-grantee so that you implement the sexual and reproductive health education for them. And you're paid to do that. But the great thing about fee for hire is the fact that you don't even have to implement. You write for them the strategy, give it to them, and then the other organization will do it, but they will pay you for your time. That's how you diversify your revenue streams. So if you're running a nonprofit organization, think about how you need to run it as a social enterprise by bringing in a business arm to your nonprofit so that you don't rely on donors and grants and individual contributions. That way you'll be making your money and you'll be on your way to sustainability. Before I end, I really also want to speak about emerging and types of donations which are going on in terms of funding. Of course, we know the individual of donors. There are so many family foundations now. There's venture philanthropists. There are impact investors. These I love. Many more organizations are now interested in social impact projects. And so look out for those. Of course, government and development agencies are many. There's corporate funding. But I really want to speak about corporate social investment, which used to be called corporate social responsibility. So now major corporations have realized that it's an investment, it's just being responsible. And in looking at this, this is one of the ways to build a business case for support. So when you're going to a corporate social investment company, look at what you're proposing and align it with their mission and vision and need. For example, if you are going to a bank, think about your community and say, for example, financial literacy is a big issue within my community. So you go to Citibank or Barclays Bank or Stanbic Bank and ask for a donation or a sponsorship for a specific project within your organization. That's number one. Number two, you can also ask the corporate company what they call employee giving for the employees to give to your organization. And lastly, and also very interesting concept, many of the corporate companies have volunteer programs. You can actually write to them and say, for example, we want 20 mentors to mentor our girls, and they do it as part of the corporate social investment. And before I end, I really want us to think through the next steps, because we can talk about the problem landscape, we can talk about the solution landscape, we can talk about the implementation landscape, we can talk about the best practices and how we are going to score these projects. But we really need to know that at the end of the day, it's your job to do the grants writing. So as a next step, I'm going to ask you only one question. What are you going to do? Just 2 to 3 steps. What are your next steps after today to enable you create diverse revenue streams and unlock more capital? Only 2 to 3 steps you're going to embark on within your organization, within your team, so that you create revenue streams. And in dealing this, take out a moment and sit with your team and think about these 8 aspects I've outlined. But this depends on your need and where you are right now. Think about the vision. You need to redefine, for example, your fundraising goal in the next 3 years. You need to think about the purpose. You define what your funding needs are. The strategy. You need to write a fundraising plan. Because like they say, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. And you also need to think about the systems, the internal systems, the teams, the financial management systems. Can they really take in the grants you're thinking about getting? So think about the internal systems. Think about the projects. Probably you need to create new innovative projects to attract new future funding. You need to think about communication. We need to create compelling case studies and cases for support. We also need to build our visibility for our work. We need to have knowledge. I call this learning and relearning. In order to be an effective fundraiser, you need to unlearn, relearn, and unlearn all the time. Probably you need to go and get the knowledge and information that you need. Lastly, you need to think about the networks that are going to create your net worth. Explore outside your networks. Think beyond the networks you know. Like I said, first think about within your country, within your community, within Africa, within Asia, within your continent, but also think about other networks that you can tap in. So I'll really invite you to take the time for you and your organization to think about these 8 areas. And you can choose 2 to 5 and say in the next 2 to 3 days or 5 days, these are the steps I'm going to do. And remember, the weakest pen is stronger than the strongest mind. So you need to put them down. As I finish, I really want to emphasize that there's no shortage of funding, but there's shortage of bold, innovative ideas. And that was said by the Harvard Business School Innovation Lab. And I'll repeat that. There is no shortage of funding, but there's shortage of bold, innovative ideas. We all have ideas, we don't put them on paper, we don't practice them. So what we see is where funders are on one side and grant seekers are on one side. And in the middle, there's a huge gap on communication, on knowledge, on skills, on capacity. There's a lot of mistrust between the funders and the grant seekers. And most importantly, there are so many silos. Each one of us as a nonprofit organization is working on their own, you're working in your own silo, you're not working with others. You think I'm protecting my project. I'm saying we need collaborations. We need to work together. For me, my personal mission and vision with the incubator that I'm building, bold ideas and connect them to funding opportunities. So that others are not here, grant seekers are here. I want to bring them together. That's where I call it an incubator, because I'm linking them to funding opportunities, for mentorship, for everything. We really need to work together. I proudly say that the night sky, there are billions of stars that come together. And in Africa, we say that if you walk alone, you go fast. But when you take others, you go far. So in this journey of grants writing and fundraising and unlocking more capital, never walk alone. Work with others. Ask for questions. I'm here personally, I'm committing myself for the next 10 years to support nonprofit organizations and social innovators who have bold ideas to write compelling grants, to unlock more capital so that we invest in our communities. We need to break the intergenerational cycles within our communities. We need to break the gender inequalities, the racial inequalities, the climate change impact. We really need to work together. And thank you very much. If you need to support on your work, if you need to know more about my work, you can find me at rehemakasule.com. And I'm ready. I'm here to support people. I'm here to support women. I love women causes. I love young people's causes. So let's work together and make this happen. Thank you very much.